Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, you are back. How were your last couple weeks?
Yeah, man, it was a whirlwind, man. It was doing the Scripps National Spelling Bee. This is year 3 for me, year 4 that we've had it. It's cool. It's a whirlwind, right? It's one of those events that you always see on ESPN, and I realized that's why I knew so much about it, because I was just addicted to ESPN as a kid, and it ran on ESPN. I was like, why do I know so much about the spelling bee? Because even as a child, I was a degenerate sports viewer, so I was just like, you know what, I got to watch this. What are we competing? What are we spelling? So that was super cool. Got to do got some big stuff going on. On the way out, we had Cameron Brink and Caitlin Clark playing on Ion for the WNBA. So it's been a really wild, stretch in my career where I've been able to do all kinds of really cool stuff. And I'm just thankful. I'm thankful for you holding down the fort. I saw your promo of, what if Nick Saban never left LSU. I'm glad you waited for me to do that one, to not make me cry on air.
No. That wasn't it. It wasn't if he had never left LSU. It was what if he had never come back to the SEC. Let's not get it twisted. I wasn't twisting the knife like that.
Wow. You're right. No, but coming back, I guess that's the actual sad part, right? Is him coming back and being like, man, now we got to deal with you. It's not just that you left LSU. But yeah, so I saw that. I was like, this is I'm glad that Connor had this bumping around in his head and didn't include me on it.
No, it was an interesting subject to get into. Like there are a couple of those where, I was like, all right, let's go down this rabbit hole with Colby Newton. If you haven't listened to that episode, our most recent episode, he's got a book coming out in July that we talked a lot about. But yeah, it was interesting to be able to dig into that and some of the sliding doors. Just having good discussions without you, man. It's not personal.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm just messing with you. But I think that stuff is super interesting. So yeah, like I said, appreciate you holding down the fort. And yeah, I am back to my first love, which is college football, man.
Love it. And we are doing something that I know you are very passionate about, something that we've talked about, but have never put it to the test in the form of a draft. The first Thursday of the month for us, as we record this, means that it is draft day. So we are going to be drafting SEC teams in the 21st century. We've also got Pitch Me, the smartest SEC fan base, coming up later. But draft day, we are talking about something that everybody has debated about. And yeah, I mean, it's most popular to be able to say like, oh, this team's better than that team and whatever. I get it. But to be able to draft these teams, these 21st century SEC teams, will hopefully allow the depth discussion to be had and not just simply who has the best team. By the way, in case you were tracking this at home, Will, you might be, I won our QB draft with 57% of the vote. No big deal. I needed that. You wiped the floor with me in the jersey contest. So getting back some redemption is all I really am asking for out of these drafts.
I need to just stop trying to be that guy in fantasy football that wins in the weird ways and just draft things I like. Because every time I've tried to outsmart you in these drafts, it's ended up with a roster of guys that I'm not crazy about and me losing the ball.
That's a double whammy.
Yeah.
So I think today you will have plenty of opportunities to take, let's just say, teams that you have a great appreciation for. I think that it's very much on the table, but this is specific teams. For those who didn't really understand by me poorly explaining that, we have to pick a specific year associated with that team. You don't just get to draft like, oh, I'm just going to take Alabama for the 21st century, and you can't just do
done.
Like, yeah, right? Like, my God,
I win. Yeah.
Imagine being the 4 teams in the SEC that get left out. That draft would hurt some feelings. But yeah, the way this is going to work, you can't just draft dynasties either. Like, you can't just take like a team that repeated or something like that. It can be part of the context. It can be. But this is individual years. So you can kind of go in whatever direction you want. We'll let the people decide how they feel about it. Do I think personally that NFL talent is part of it? Yeah, I do. But do I think it's everything if we just want to do this by draft picks? No, I don't necessarily think that's the way to go. I personally value how dominant it felt like a specific team was. And if the road was more difficult for them to be that dominant, then I would reward that. That's going to be my draft style. I think this is pretty straightforward, but Will, is there anything on that I need to clarify?
No, I would just like to point out that I'm just going to go complete caveman brain and just think, what if this team played this team? Because, like I said, I've used matrices. I've thought about the aggregate points. I've thought about all-time leaders, and it has not worked for me. So I'm gonna have some stats. Obviously, I'm not just gonna go in blind. But I think that's the key for me is just go with my heart. That's what I'm gonna do. You're gonna out research me. That's the thing. So if I try to get in the research battle with you, it's gonna go poorly for me.
Maybe not though.
Probably.
Maybe I'm going more on vibes than just on stats alone. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Some might say that that I am more of a vibes guy than a stats guy. No, nobody would say that. Literally, not even Lauren would say that.
This is bait. I see it coming.
It is. No, I'm not going to be able to get into your head with this. I will give you the honor. Would you like first pick or second two?
I mean, it's gonna be first pick.
All right, we'll take 2019 LSU.
All right, I'm gonna take 2019 LSU. Here's why. There's not a conversation between 2019 LSU and any team that we're going to discuss today, in my opinion. 2019 LSU has the greatest single season from a quarterback, which is the most, effective position, most key position. Guy that broke records broke CUSA records in the SEC. They beat more quality teams. They beat them in a row. They were able to overcome things that other teams have not been able to. And so I just want to just kind of set the table with that, right? It's that whenever these conversations are had about 2019 LSU, and like I said, I'm not going to compare them to any SEC team that we've seen because the conversation that always comes up is 2021 Miami, right? Now I'm going to go backwards.
2001 Miami.
Of course, not 2021.
Definitely not 21 Miami. Yeah.
Of course, 2001 Miami, right? And these guys who are on Twitter and they all have sunglasses in their Avies and they're in their car. Or you didn't watch this team play. You don't understand how many NFL players are on this team. First off, if you go back through that team, because I'm not talking about the SEC, it's not worth it. If you go through that team, you look at the actual quarterbacks they played. Outside of like Tommy Frazier in Nebraska, who was more of like an option running quarterback,
wasn't there in 2001.
Oh, sorry, not Tommy Frazier. They had another
Eric
great
Crouch.
quarterback.
Eric
Crouch. Yeah. I'm sorry. The two, Nebraska is not my strong suit, obviously, but the Eric Crouch. There we go. So basically, outside of him, who was more of an option quarterback, still pretty much true, they did not play teams that could throw the ball. They did not play actual developed offenses. So yeah, their defense scored. They would have gone undefeated without their offense scoring any points. That's not a good thing for me. That means you play bad competition. If you look up and down the schedule that LSU played, you were going to see trap game after ranked game. We're talking about a team that went into Austin and won a week 2 game against Texas. Again, we've seen Texas be back in week 2. We've seen teams win these weird games, early in the season. Shout out Ohio State. But it's the fact of them beating Alabama. It's the fact of them, going into Bryant-Denny and beating Alabama. It's the fact that they had to go through this gauntlet of playing 3 straight top 4 teams, beating Georgia, beat every single like metric that you could say for LSU. They passed with flying colors. There was one game that I think LSU legitimately struggled in. That was the Auburn game, and that was just a Gus game. Those games have gotten some great Nick Saban teams. Those have done that, but that was never a game that was in my mind truly in doubt. So I'm going to go back to the 2001 Miami example really quickly. Now that we have the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history on this roster as a number 2 wide receiver, now that we have a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, number 1 draft pick on this roster, now that you look through the 2 deep of the defense, and it's what people imagine these old like SEC games are, where the first through third stringers are contributing in the NFL. When you go through and you see an offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award and has now produced 6, just depending on the week, right? 6 or 7 NFL starters on the offensive line, right? Yeah, you could point to, I guess Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a bust. Who else? There were guys on this team like Patrick Queen that were just kind of hanging out. Guys like Jacob Phillips that were just kind of hanging out that you're like, oh, wait, you're actually like really, really, really good. And you just happen to be doing that. I mean, we saw the first consensus All-American as a freshman in Derek Stingley Jr., who's now been part of the Houston Texans turnaround. This team is aged like fine wine. So let me just take the Miami part out of it, because these guys are looking retroactively at this team that could barely keep up with the pace of modern football and go, well, this guy was a freshman and didn't play, but we're going to count him. Now we can look at the impact of the NFL players in this team. Now, here's the other point that I want to make here. What was this team's weakness?
This team's weakness was a early November defense that had to figure some things out and then did. That's it. That's it. That's the only thing that you can say negatively about 2019 LSU is that they had a little bit of a rough stretch defensively and then figured it out against the elite competition. That's
And yeah,
that's a pretty good argument, if I be.
yep.
Like if you're coming to this discussion without LSU, without 2019 LSU as your number one team, I'm like, I don't know if we can have a conversation. I don't know if I want to continue this conversation beyond that, because I agree with you 100%. They are the number one team that should be on any board, and it's in part because of the road to get there too. Like you have 7 wins against teams that finish in the AP poll. All right, take that for what it is. But they beat 5 of the final top 8 teams in the AP poll. Mind you, they are one of the teams in the top 8 of the final AP poll. So there's only 6 of it or 7 available for them to be able to beat. And they beat 5 of them. They beat them by an average of 20 points, Will. They beat all those teams by at least 14 points except Bama, a game that I thought they were in control throughout and never really thought that they were going to lose that game once it started. But yeah, I mean, this team made things look so unbelievably easy. And that's the part that I'll never forget is being in that press box. I saw the team play 3 times that year, the first of which was the aforementioned Auburn game, a game that was really tense for LSU and Death Valley. Their only real kind of grinded out struggle type game that year. The Georgia game, which was 75% Georgia fans in Mercedes-Benz. And by halftime, they're just trying to figure out which boozy song they're going to play in the post game. And then,
well, remember they didn't have George Pickens for that first half, though. You got to let him. That's what they were telling me at halftime. Yeah, wait till George Pickens walks out that locker room, buddy.
Yeah, didn't think you had to worry about that one. And then to see the way that it played out, in the postseason as well, or in the playoff, like that to me is what makes this group so dominant. Like being there for Oklahoma. And having to remind myself over and over, Connor, this is a playoff game. A national championship berth is on the line with these 2 teams that don't belong on the same field. And you have grown men. And yes, it's men. It's not women in a press box, because women in the press box, there's not enough of them. There should be more. That's a separate discussion for a different time. But you have grown men who have seen tons of things in college football who are belly laughing at these LSU touchdowns that are being scored at will against Oklahoma. It's the number one choice here. No debate whatsoever.
Yeah. And I think that, you just hit on something, which is that they redefined how to win, right? When you think about the way the hype videos with Will Stout came out, when you think about how they made the championship logo with the Superdome in there, when you think about how every game had these moments that you can't script, and we've seen teams try to script them since then. We've seen, not to pick on them, we've seen Tennessee bring in the dancing guy when they're on the way up and everything. LSU was uniquely creating these beautiful moments that were just so, I could go through, obviously, I could go through each one of these games as a fan and go, I remember the Florida game, the Gator Chomp. I remember the horns down against Texas. There were all these moments throughout the season. And one thing I just want to say, and I'll close on this because we are aligned here, which is that whenever you talk about any type of an all-time, situation, your ability to win and matters, right? Your ability, like that's obvious, right? But there is not a player in the history of college football that I would ever bet against in an all-time matchup like this. When you think about the way that, look at Patrick Mahomes in the NFL, guys lost to 2 quarterbacks in the postseason. Tom Brady and Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow came back from 28 points down and beat him at Arrowhead Stadium. So that's always been my argument for this team is that, they never had to play this style of game. Oh, they could have. That's what you don't understand. Joe Burrow had 3 points against Mahomes and had to go back and scrap and grit and do all this. So yeah, I think that when I talk about the lack of weaknesses and the fact that it just felt so easy and fun, and it was just a great cap to I'll say this and be done because I know this is a lot, but this team's story started with that the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl against UCF, where they snapped the longest active winning streak in college football, and it finished snapping Clemson's longest active winning streak in football. They beat Trevor Lawrence. They beat all these, Walker, the number 1 overall pick. So there was not a team on the board, maybe Ohio State, but okay, Ryan Day. There was not a team that had a case to say, well, LSU didn't see us. No.
Wait a minute. Did you just count Trayvon Walker as a freshman as a credit to LSU?
No, but I'm saying, remember, there was the video of Burrow shaking him, putting him in the dirt. And it's all these guys that became these terrors going on. Like, hey, look, if you're a number one overall pick and you have a free run at a quarterback, you should get him down. And Joe Burrow had a way to finesse. And again, like talking about Randy Moss's son was the tight end. Jamar Chase was the best receiver. He's not even that now because of the way Jefferson's grown. The 4 touchdowns, all of that. It was just awesome.
Yeah, there are just seasons like 2019 LSU that come around so rarely, and that was always going to be first pick here. All right, I got second too.
Cool.
We're going to go on the other end of the spectrum here. We're going to get defensive. My first pick, second overall, is 2021 Georgia.
Love it.
It's the best defense of the 21st century, and I have the numbers to be able to back it up because if you take away non-offensive scores, which you always should, in my opinion, Georgia in 2021, with all the different things we know about passing, the way that targeting is called, and all these different things that are working against the defense, Georgia in 2021 allowed an average of 8.8 points per game. The only groups, again, we're taking away non-offensive touchdowns.
Could you say that one more time?
They allowed 8.8 points per game, Will.
That's so funny. I'm sorry. Good call. Yep.
2011 Bama allowed 6.5 points per game, like taking away the non-offensive scores. And then aforementioned 2001 Miami, 8 points per game. A little bit of different competition, 20 years apart. I think we can say college football has changed very drastically in terms of the way that offensive football works. Even if you didn't take away non-offensive scores, I think you always should. But even if you didn't want to do that, Georgia was still 1.5 points per game better than any defense in the playoff era. Georgia's first team defense did not allow a running back to have a run of 20 yards in a 15-game season. And 7 times that year, they faced a 1,000-yard back.
They played so many good players.
It's insane to think about what that group did, and to think like even against quality competition, like 6 games against teams that finished ranked in the AP poll, Georgia allowed 1 rushing touchdown. There is a wild thought that I didn't even realize until looking back on this, because I was like, yeah, I knew 2021 Georgia was going to have an elite defense, but it's never about the individuals with Kirby. So I'm like, I wonder how many preseason all SEC guys on the first team that they had. Will, do you know the answer to that question?
Wait. Preseason all SEC. Say that again. Preseason
first team all SEC on defense.
If there's 11 players, I'm going to say like 5 or 6.
Oh, no. One.
Oh.
One in the preseason. That's it.
Wow.
Jordan Davis was it. Okay.
Just Jordan Davis. That's crazy when you think about like how well they played. That's your point. Okay.
And they had 6 all SEC guys by the end of the season, 4 of which were first team all SEC. But it just speaks to how dominant that group was, that they could just suffocate you in ways that felt like a throwback. I mean, felt special at the time. I still, to the ends of the earth, I will argue that DJ Uiagalelei's career is entirely different if he doesn't face Georgia in that season opener. It just is.
Yep.
They beat 12 bowl teams. Even LSU in 2019, as daunting of a road as that was, and I still think LSU's road in 2019 was tougher than 2021 Georgia's. But 2019 LSU only had 11 bowl teams, and Georgia beat 12 of them. I mean, the combination of Stetson Bennett being clutch, avenging the Bama loss, that's all part of it as well. But when we look back on this 2021 Georgia team, we will think of a historically dominant defense that, in my opinion, will stand the test of time in ways that even groups of like the early 2010s, I think this Georgia group will stand out and will truly feel special 20, 30 years from now.
I love talking football with you, man, because I was going to ask, God, our list is going to be so different. I was going to feel bad for a team that has a special place in my heart with a loss, making it as high as I had them. This is a team with a loss.
Team with a loss. Avenged it, though. Avenged it. That's, in my opinion, the mark of a great team. Yeah. Is if you can look at those issues, and I'm not going to get into the conspiracy theory, they threw that game so they'd have an advantage in the national championship. I'm not even going to do the thing where I say Georgia won the national championship only because Jameson Williams got hurt. Jameson Williams was a great player. Jameson Williams would have given Alabama a much better chance to be able to win that football game. Georgia was still so unbelievably clutch down the stretch, and especially on the offensive side of the ball with the things that they started doing in the fourth quarter of that game. That atmosphere was one of one. But yeah, to me, that's okay to have a loss. Not
Mm-hmm.
all undefeated teams are necessarily better than teams that had a loss, but Georgia got the unique opportunity to be able to avenge that loss and took advantage of it and ended a drought that was 4 decades long. Again, I know it's not all about historical perspective. I think that has to go into it when you talk about 2021 Georgia. So I'm okay with that being my first pick, second overall here.
I love it. I love the logic. Like I said, this is all just personal preference. So I love that a defensive team that kind of bucks the trend is going second there.
Okay, so my second pick, this will be third overall, is another defensive team, 2009 Bama. Saban's first title team
People are gonna
had.
hate us, dog.
Well, we got diversity in this start so far. We got Georgia, Bama, LSU. This isn't. We're not just beating the drum over and over again for one team. Who's gonna hate us? Nothing wrong with
No,
that.
I just like the fact that because I'm with you. That team was horrifying. I remember the team whooping me, but everybody thinks 2020 Bama was better than them. But I don't know how to agree. I'm with you. Go on. Yeah.
I have some thoughts that we'll get to later with 2020 Bama.
Yeah.
Look, that 2009 Bama team, Saban's first title team, of course, like
Yeah.
Heisman winning running back and Mark Ingram, number 2 defense in the sport. Only 2 games decided by one score, neither of which came in the SEC championship, wherein they got over the Florida hump, and it was this huge, monumental Bama has arrived sort of game. It's a 14-0 season in which you didn't have that lone blemish. If you're doubting how good this team was, it is entirely 100% because of the quarterback and because of the passing game. And it's
Mm-hmm.
fair. It's look, we're not talking about that passing game like it was 2019 LSU. We're not. It's also fair to mention that, look, if you had a team that had that good of a defense and you had Mark Ingram and Trent Richardson at running back, you could win a national championship by completing 6 passes for 58 yards. Alabama had that luxury. It had the
Mm-hmm.
luxury of a certain Colt McCoy injury. Yeah, it did. But it did all of those things and it dominated. And to me, it's the dominance of that Florida team. And look, the Swamp Kings debate about like, oh, is Florida, like was Florida really geared up for that one as they should have been? I don't care. Bama whipped them. I mean, absolutely whipped them. I remember watching that game and thinking to myself, like I was watching like all these fraternity brothers and stuff like that. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
like every one of them was like, Bama's winning this game and Tebow is just going to be humiliated. And then that was the Tebow Tears game. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh gosh, I was woefully wrong on this one. Bama shut up a lot of people that year, and to me, that game arriving kind of put a stamp on that entire season and what they were trying to do.
Yeah, I mean that was the moment that my fears became realized and
Yeah.
did not go away for over a decade, right? That was the team. I mean, and that was a team that had, kind of these moments like we were talking about, right? Like they had like like you said, like they came back against Florida. That was the Mount Cody block year, right?
Correct. 2009
Yeah.
was the 12-10 game against Lane, Tennessee. The Mount Cody game is probably a game that we should have done for It Just Meant More at some point. But yeah, that was one of their 2 games that was decided by 14 points or less that year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's kind of the thing, right? Like it's the fact that they had these games. Again, this is old school football, right? 2009. This is your ground and pound. Mark Ingram, taking your soul away, and that was Alabama's first Heisman winner, right? And so like
Yeah.
that was another like that was kind of like Nick Saban silencing everybody at once. Like, okay, well, guess what? Bear Bryant didn't do. All right, I got a Heisman winner. I'm gonna go beat Tim Tebow. I'm gonna win this game we should have lost. Lots of games that I mean, even the LSU game that year was close. You know what I'm saying? It was the fact that they had, they beat Spurrier. They did all these different little. I mean, even talking about when they started off against VT, which was a top 10 matchup at the time. That was when VT was at the height of their power. So we got to go get into a little bit of a time capsule here. And like to me, the only thing that like holds them back is that Colt McCoy injury, because that's a game that I would love to have played over. Because when we go back and see, wow, Colt McCoy is like a 15-year NFL veteran. Like maybe that does make a little bit of a difference. Not to say they win the game, but it would just have been an objectively better game. You know what I'm saying? Like it would have we would have known more about both of those teams. And you just hate to see injuries. But yeah, other than that, it was an undefeated team. It was the avenging the loss of 2008. I love this pick here.
Yeah, when the SEC is what we know it to be today, too. That's an important part of this, and it'll be interesting to see how many early 21st century teams we go with from the early 2000s. knowing what we know now about the SEC in the midst of that national championship stretch. Okay, so that we have 3 teams off the board. Who is your second pick?
Man, yeah. Again, I'm going with what I love here. 2008 Florida.
Dang, that was next on my board. Yeah.
So here's what people kind of never really talk about with 2008 Florida. Okay, 2008 Florida, I understand they have a loss. Okay, guess what? That's just called playing football at Florida. All right, for whatever reason, that team is cursed. They can't go undefeated. I don't know why. If you watch that game, it was a super weird game. But again, we've already kind of explained why that one loss doesn't exactly disqualify you. But where I'm going with that is that this is like, imagine if you took 90% of that 2021 Georgia defense and gave them Tim Tebow. Like, that's what people don't understand about this Florida team is they were beating people to sleep physically on the defensive side of the ball. They were smacking people. Like, they had these final scores that were just how they beat number 8 Georgia 49-10. It was not just, again, if you could just say that some of these teams, they kind of fall asleep. That was the thing about LSU. This team did not fall asleep. Urban Meyer was peak power screaming at these boys. The weapons they had, the offensive line with the pouncies, talking about Percy Harvin, talking about these guys on the outside, like the
Aaron
way that
Hernandez.
Aaron Hernandez, I didn't want to say it, but he was there. I mean, this was a very, very interesting team. You know what I'm saying? And they were able to play together as one. And in terms of an off the bus scary team, you know what I'm saying? It's hard to. I mean, they just had Carlos Dunlop hanging around. You know, like that's the name of the guy that we've even talked about. But yeah, like they were able. Lewis Murphy, another NFL guy, George Jenkins. So like the fact, gosh, man. I mean, the hit in that championship game, I still get chills thinking about it, man.
Major Wright's quote that he had in Swamp Kings. I didn't want the ball. I wanted him.
Yep.
I mean, third play of the game. That play, think of how much football we've watched over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Think of how rare you can think of a time in which that play on that type of route had that type of hit. Because guys go for the ball.
He was not playing the ball. It was very simple. Yeah.
And that was the mantra of that Florida team. That post-promise Florida team was a sight to behold. I mean, they faced 4 top 10 teams after that, beat them all by double digits, including that Oklahoma team. Yeah, when I close my eyes and think of that Florida team, it's the promise, it's the Major Wright hit, and then it's Tebow with his only unsportsmanlike penalty that he had in his entire career when he chomped right at the Sooners in the end zone of that national championship game, a game in which they controlled, they led throughout. Florida's good. I almost took them with my second pick because I figured you weren't going to take 09 Bama there. So now I'm kind of regretting that because I really wanted 08 Florida. That was like my default NCAA football video game team. Like
Gator
like
heavy.
Oh my God, like Tebow and Harbin all day, man. That team was just lights out. Dang, that's a really good pick. You're off to the start that I hoped you weren't going to have. I'm in trouble.
Well, because people that they kind of don't get football, they lost the game. But it's like, no, dude. Like, because when you really go through this, exactly what you just said, man. It's a little bit of everything, and I do want to say this, like on the talent standpoint. We're talking about this is a team that has Joe Hayden. Their specialists, bro, were Caleb Sturgis and Chaz Henry. Like every facet of this team was built.
That's Urban. Yeah. I love special teams so much. This is like Urban's vision come to life. Maybe more than any other team, I think, is 08 Florida.
And that's what people like. I feel like a crazy person until I talk to you because when people say like, hey, okay, pick a team to beat 29 LSU. 08 Florida. That's the team that's going to give that team the biggest run for their money. I'm not saying they're going to beat them because I think I got the number 1 and 2 picks. But like, if you're talking about a team that was not going to give up, you talked about the promise thing, man. I mean, freaking chills, man. Having them lose that game on kind of the 4th down stop against Ole Miss, having them go, okay, like the kids, it's the statue, the speech. They're like, I promise, like I basically like him saying I failed and I'm gonna make this happen is just like as a leader, everything you'd want, and just the way this team fit together. You guys got Jeff Dimps as like a speedy back. Everybody just fits so well. So like, yeah, that's kind of. I feel like I'm just naming some dudes now, but overall, it's like they just were a perfectly constructed team, and that 1-point loss, unless you're just like a take meister, should not disqualify this team from being what I think was the second best SEC team I've ever seen.
Yeah, man, you're going to get a lot of love for 08 Florida, as you should. Yeah. You might have just won the draft with 08 Florida. It's a really good start, Will. Okay, my third pick, this is 5th overall. I'm going 2010 Auburn.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So look, I get it. I struggle with this a lot, and I think there are different arguments to be had about 2010 Auburn. And I think the two most noteworthy elements of this team are actually a little bit overrated, and we need to kind of come down somewhere in the middle because, like, I agree, Cam had maybe the best season we've ever seen for a college player. If you don't think he did, you at least think he's in the discussion for it. He's
Mhm.
on whatever short list you want to come up with, right? If you tell me, yeah, I get him and I'll just figure the rest out, I'm kind of good. But how much do we say that Cam's brilliance made Auburn's team, the 2010 Auburn Tigers, truly elite, truly a special SEC team? Cam was unreal. But am I picking 2010 Auburn to beat 2021 Georgia? I'm not. I'm not. So that's why they're a little bit lower. That's why I'm not just being like, oh, I'll just take Cam and, like with my first pick or something like that because of how dominant he was. I
Mhm.
don't think that 2010 Auburn beats 2008 Florida. I don't. I'm not going to argue that. I loved your pick. I would have done the exact same thing you did. At the same time, we always talk about how void of NFL talent that roster was, and Cole
And
had
it's
this.
wrong.
It's wrong in for this
It's
discussion.
misguided. Yeah.
It's misguided. Yes, it's
Yep.
misguided for this discussion. Cole has the stat that I always forget, but I always like circle back. I should just bookmark the tweet. I don't know why I don't. But when I can't just remember it, I need to look it up just to remind myself of it. Cam was the only member of the 2010 Auburn team who had an NFL catch, a rushing attempt, or a passing attempt, and only one offensive lineman started an NFL game on that entire team.
Mhm.
It's crazy. Do we factor that into Auburn's legacy too much that year? Because I think two things can be true. I think we might factor it into Auburn's legacy too much, and maybe it hurts them a little bit. But I also think it's part of what made Cam so unbelievably impressive. If we're talking about the most impressive college seasons ever, then that deserves to be part of that discussion. I have no problem with using that stat to kind of push the argument over the top for him as having the best single season in college football history. But that team deserves a lot of credit because they ran through the SEC at a time when even Bama, Bama, I get it, it's like disappointing or whatever because they had the 3-loss season in 2010, but it was still very much an established SEC in the midst of this title run, and talent
Mhm.
was still unbelievably good. And it had to beat 5 top 12 teams at the time of the matchup, including the Iron Bowl comeback. So I know I'm probably going to get a little bit of pushback for the overall team that was 2010 Auburn, but I do think, man, like what they did as an undefeated team with one of the best players in college football history deserves to be recognized early enough in this draft.
So, okay, I always push back on this for like a similar but slightly different reason. Okay, people that want to compare this team to like a '08 Florida or a 2019 LSU, I don't understand how much more data I have to give you people on Gus Malzahn. He does not want to play football that way. Okay, for a Gus Malzahn football team, this was about perfect. Because if you look at what was successful on this team, okay, sure, you didn't have a lot of skill guys. When has he ever had that? Never, pretty much. So what was good about this team? Line of scrimmage. They were mauling dudes. That's what people do not talk about with this team. Talking about Lee Zimba, Ryan Pugh, right? Brandon Mosley. These were all SEC offensive linemen. Then your quarterback is a Clydesdale horse that takes 3 people to turn. And then they had 3 good running backs. Michael Dyer with the obviously famous like not going down play, but underrated how great he was as a recruit because the way his career finished at Louisville and everything. Ontario McCaleb, the speed guy, Mario Fannin. The fact that every time the ball was snapped, you were going to get 4 yards of push from your offensive line, and you didn't know who had the ball. And the biggest nightmare wasn't Cam running it. It was you thinking Cam was going to run it, and then he drops it off over the top. And then you flip it to the other end. Look at Nick Fairley and Zach Clayton, again, controlling the line of scrimmage. People sleep on Nico Thorpe and how good he was. This was a team that was designed to just sit on you and crush you like a squid. And people just think, well, nobody played in the NFL. This team may not have been very good. Well, okay, then Gus Malzahn should have never beaten Nick Saban not one time. Okay? He obviously knew what he was looking for. He obviously knew what he could win with. Yeah, whenever he was playing, an NFL DB or running back at quarterback, Nick Marshall, everyone was going, well, this guy ain't going to win the Heisman. No, he's going to beat Alabama. He's going to play for a national title. That was the Gus Malzahn way. So when people act like these guys were playing the same game and act like because this team didn't, I have three good receivers, they weren't supposed, having three good receivers would not have benefited them whatsoever.
College football changed a lot, not immediately after this, but pretty soon after this. And so maybe that's part of the discussion of why Auburn isn't viewed necessarily that way. And I guess I'm viewing them that way because I took them as the fifth best SEC team of the 21st century. But the things that they did well, they did extremely well, because if they didn't, they would have been exposed. And we don't talk about Auburn in that season as having the moments that obviously the 2013 Auburn team did, or even, and I'm not trying to tip picks here, but like a 2006 Florida, where it's the Jarvis Moss blocked field goal against South Carolina to preserve their national title hopes. They didn't really have those moments necessarily. And that, to me, to go undefeated through the SEC at that specific time, it is certainly darn impressive. And don't let the NFL stuff kind of get in the way of who that team was in college football. And then to beat that Oregon team, a team that had all the different kinds of speed, played differently than SEC teams that they faced throughout the entire year, and to still be able to control that game and win it. 2010 Auburn was the team you hated to root against.
Yeah, they were a great vibes team. And like another guy, Letson Kirchen, the tight end that obviously has like passed away since. Like this is a guy that you can't account. This is a guy who finished with 600 receiving yards and 14 college football touchdowns. Like he was playing his exact role. They would get to the goal line, it would be him or Ken. So point being, like these are all cogs in this horrifying machine. And that's the thing about these Gus teams. And again, I know our boy Gene Chizik was the coach. I get it, but in terms of the offense, which is what everybody tries to dump on. And where I'm going with that is that like everybody thinks their team would beat this team until they play this team. And then they realize that things do not go the way that you think they will when you play this type of Gus Malzahn team. That's all to say.
And I realize I'm biased when it comes to Chizik and stuff like that, but the other bias that I have with James Franklin that I brought up the other day about one of the things that frustrated me was how often he would take the ball out of Trace McSorley's hands. Chizik, to his credit, you could say what you want about what happened afterwards. He never took the ball out of Cam's hands. Ever. Yep. And you recognize, oh, buddy, if we do that, that is a giant, giant mistake in some of these pivotal moments. So 2010 Auburn, hopefully that doesn't get me too much pushback and still gives me a chance to be able to win this. What do you got with your next pick?
Yes. All right. So at this point, this is going to be my one, like, okay, we can't leave this team here. I'm taking 2020 Bama. Now, I think the thing that's interesting about 2020 Bama, right, is the different ways they could beat you, right? And we talked about this the other day. It's like, like you texted me, I think you said Brian Robinson, we kind of like underrated him as like a feature back. And I'm like, okay, but Najee Harris, bro. Yeah. Like this guy was horrifying. Like not to try to like compare guys or whatever, but like having a shortened season and rushing for almost 1,500 yards and 26 touchdowns and not being the best player on your own offense is nuts. The concept of, and again, like, there's the tropes or the lines about this team, and there's the reality of this team. The reality of this team is that Mac Jones was able to pull the levers that were needed, right? He was not this all-world quarterback. He was not an NFL quarterback, but we've given credit to guys like Stetson Bennett who are doing the same things. He was a guy who was an experienced chef with an amazing amount of ingredients around him. And it felt like pretty much no matter which tool he reached for, it was successful. And, we could talk about 2020, and I'm usually the guy who's dumping on 2020 and the fact that, defense was not the same and all this different stuff. And the year was like an asterisk or whatever. But I think that watching this Alabama team, there was not really ever, like, let me just go back and see if I remember this correctly. There was not ever really a point where I was like, yeah, they're in trouble. They're cooked. I mean, like there was the Florida game, but I don't think they ever trailed in that game. I think that it was just back and forth and back and forth. That was like one of my stats. Me and Marlo like joked about. I was like, yeah, it was a back and forth game. It was a game that they never were in danger of losing. There was that weird turnover and everything, but that was their closest game. And so it's so weird because it's like a version of cognitive dissonance where you're like watching something on the field and you're like, they're smoking everyone. And you could talk about the level of competition being lower, but at the same time, you could obviously transport that team into like this year and they would be terrifying because you can look and see who these knives were on these teams. You can look and see Devontae Smith and Waddle, who obviously was hurt, came back, which was crazy. And so like that's the thing is like I'm not exactly going to say like, oh, NFL, because, a lot of these guys are wide receiver twos in the NFL. But at the same time, at the college level, this was a team that it just never had to go to its second move. And I don't think that we should ever hold a team, if you're going to play an SEC schedule, you shouldn't hold it against them. That's like, what was their second move? Well, they didn't need it. So why would I care? It's like the give the ball to Cam play. It worked every time. I don't know.
I'm stunned that you picked this. I really am. I had assumed we were going to be talking about this in honorable mention because I didn't have 2020 Bama in my top 10 for this reason.
Okay.
It almost feels like it should be a separate category.
Fair.
I think what they did within that season was incredibly impressive with all the different things that they were working against with COVID and stuff like that. It's totally different than how we talk about rosters in a specific year, where if you have a team that just deals with a bunch of injuries and you're too deep, all right, like, yeah, that's bad luck. How much of that is on you because maybe you don't necessarily have the depth that you'd like to have? But just with COVID tests, where, yeah, I mean, you could say that you were doing things safely and you were, whatever, you were following whatever sort of guidelines your team had in place, but there was so much randomness to it.
Yep.
And it's so hard for me to quantify what 2020 Bama did, as dominant as it was. The only other moment that year where it was like, Bama, kind of, are they going to figure things out, was the Ole Miss game where they left 25 yards of offense on the field. I mean, the entire time. That was the only other moment in which this team might have looked like it had some chinks in the armor, because it was unbelievably dominant, but it was so one of one unique that I almost feel wrong comparing it to all these other seasons wherein you had packed houses and you had basically full rosters or close to it. And yes, Bama navigated all those other things. Incredibly impressive. You could make the case that it's the single most impressive Nick Saban coaching job. But I have such a tough time comparing it to these other teams, knowing what they were dealing with and knowing some of the things that worked in their favor that none of these other teams had to be able to navigate. So that's why it wasn't on my board, but I get it. And they were one of the most dominant SEC teams of all time. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it is kind of a blending of a couple of eras of Alabama football, right? Like you have like your John Mechie's, you have your like guys that would kind of come in, like Will Anderson was on that team and playing like real minutes and started like for parts of the season. So point being, like you also had like Dylan Moses on this team, so like it was just like a very weird kind of like cross of all these teams. So that's kind of what I keep going back to. And that, like I said, it's just not a conversation for me for like 2019 LSU to 2020 Bama. I hope that we can now remove ourselves what we've seen every year that the sports outlets try to get us to talk about this. But I do think that this team is a great team. I'm not dumping on it. And the thing that grounds me back, because I'm the most COVID hater guy ever. And I'm usually the one like pushing guys to that. But for this, it's when you look at the guys that were successful after, when you look at the amount of knives in there, when you look at the fact that their defense at times was not great, but the players on that defense ended up being great. So yeah, I would love to see, this is like my overall sim. Like I talked about Alabama, I'd love to see them play against Texas with Colt McCoy. I would love to see this team run a just 2018 season. Just stick them in a random season and see how they do. I'm sure they still smack lots of teams and probably also go undefeated, but you never know. Again, Florida shouldn't have lost a game.
Yeah. All right. I didn't think I'd go here this early, but let me go 2022 Georgia. A team that I think we both talked about why it didn't feel quite as dominant as 21. And that's why, I'm glad I had 21 picked high on my board. I'm going to look like a Georgia homer with this. I really am. And I think part of why we don't necessarily put 2022 Georgia in that category is because of how we feel about TCU and that title game. A team that, look, if we go back and look at the history of teams that lost in national championship games, TCU is going to be very, very far down that list. I get it.
But if that's the thing about that is other revisionist stuff is that if Kirby calls off the dogs or lets them score 2 more touchdowns, we don't think about it that way. But it's the fact that they smoked Michigan, who then went on to win a national championship the next year, and they just crushed TCU. So it's one of those where it's like, what do you want to do? Score more points so it looks like they were a better matchup for Georgia because they beat CJ Stroud in the qualifying game.
Yeah, it's weird. If Georgia wins that game 45-21, do we talk about it with more
It's
respect?
better for them long term, right?
Yeah, it is weird.
Because if it was Alabama, if it was Ohio State they beat like that, it's different. But because it's TCU, we're going to go, TCU, I don't know, they got lucky. They beat Michigan. Like, what do you want?
Yeah, they did. And you know what? Georgia gets knocked because the two teams it faced in the playoff were teams that just lost their conference. Well, they didn't win their conference championship. Ohio State lost to Michigan, obviously in the regular season finale, and then TCU loses to Kansas State in that game. So we already viewed those two teams as kind of flawed teams, and Georgia had to kind of scrap and claw just to be able to get past Ohio State. That year, they didn't have to face Alabama at all. And so that's why maybe historically speaking, we don't remember it in that sort of way. But at the same time, it wasn't like they just beat nobody, right? I mean, they dominated that Oregon team, absolutely dominated. And then the Tennessee game, a game that, look, some people might have said on a couple of shows that Tennessee was going to go into Athens and win a football game. I don't know who said that. Whoever said that probably was an idiot and probably didn't know what they were talking about. But that game was such a loud championship statement. I get that it rained in the second half. It was still an unreal performance against a number one offense in college football that had all the momentum in the world and ended up being a pretty battle-tested Tennessee team when Hendon Hooker was healthy that year. So, look, I think that there are obvious reasons why Georgia is not one of the 2 or 3 teams in this conversation, despite the fact that it was 15-0 with a national championship win of 65-7. They were eating buffalo wings in the fourth quarter of that game. It was so lopsided. That's dominant. But I'm admitting here that there is definitely some drawback and the road that it took to be able to get there. And the fact that for a team that lost 15 players to the NFL draft, it wasn't viewed as in the same way that 2021 was. So that's kind of a sheepish 4th pick for me, 7th overall.
Man, I was going to have to go in a direction here. Well, okay, first off, it's just hard. That's the third thing I would say in this order would be, I want 2021 and 2022 Georgia to play each other. Because if we talked about it while it was happening, 2021 Georgia is a team that did not have their quarterback figured out to start the year and scored 10 points against Clemson. Like, having that version of Stetson Bennett in 2022, it's like getting what you thought Daniels was. It's like they added, like, if you imagine that you added a 5-star quarterback, which was incumbent starter Stetson Bennett, and the way that he elevated the team and the way that he showed up in these huge moments, this is a team without a loss. You know what I'm saying? It's a team that we're not going to talk about the SEC championship game, but they were pretty much in control of that one too. And again, did enough to, get Jaden Daniels out of the game. He was playing a little bit injured, but like they quickly ran away with that game through like special teams, defense, all that, tip balls. And so point being, like, I kind of low key think 22 Georgia is better than 2021 because they could beat you in different ways. Like I said, we saw one game get off the rails for 2021 Georgia against Bama, and it did not go well for them. They couldn't come back and win. And Stetson Bennett, to a degree, kind of cost them that game with the turnovers. He got better. He had a turnover in the championship game in 21, and he got over it. And then 22, it was just like, okay, like they're just not struggling. So I actually think it's a great value pick here. I was going to get them next.
Oh, okay. Then I feel less bad about that. All right, who do you got? Your 4th pick.
Well, one of these was going to be heartbreaking, so I might as well just do this one. 2012 Bama.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Not 2011, but 2012.
Not 2011 because they went 1-1 against the other number 1 team and lost it.
There you go.
Okay. So no, because here's the difference, right? And this is kind of shades of exactly what I was talking about. People, I guess this is like a sleeping on thing. People actually sleep on how good AJ McCarron was in 2012. And it was very similar to Stetson Bennett in a way, right? It was almost like a parallel. This is a guy that threw 30 touchdowns and 3 picks. This is a guy that got invited to the Heisman. This is a guy that was an actual weapon at the quarterback position for the first time in Nick Saban's tenure. John Parker, Hoover legend. I'm not jumping on him, but that felt a little bit more like the Mark Ingram, Julio Jones show. This was when we're talking about AJ McCarron, like Mr. Alabama, leading his team to back-to-back titles. To say, we talked about, Bryce Young, maybe the best Bama quarterback ever. Like, we need to talk about McCarron more in those situations because, you come from, okay, McElroy was the guy that put them on the map, and then you had all this different stuff. the drop off from him to Coker is why I put 2012 Bama over 2015 Bama. Because,
Yep.
you got, and again, they didn't have to go to their second move. I got it. They just ran people over with Derrick Henry. But I would rather take a guy in McCarron who showed you that he was able to overcome. Like, TJ Yeldon was not this, like, typical Bama back. They had Eddie Lacy, but look at it. They got the fast guy. They got Thunder and Lightning. Boy, did that team have TJ Yeldon. Anyway, so
Certain screen pass bring up a couple of memories for you.
Yeah, I was like, either one's gonna be heartbreaking. Might as well be this one. But like, that's the key. Is I think Georgia is such a good foil for this, because just as I think that 2022 Georgia is a little bit better than 21, I think that 2012 Bama is a little bit better than 2011 because their incumbent starter quarterback grew up. It wasn't all about, oh, we're gonna suffocate you and hold on. It was about, no, like, we're chilling. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is us, and they're coming back, because repeating is like one of the hardest things to do. And what do? They start off with a top 10 matchup against Michigan, smoke them. You know what I'm saying? And they're just cooking right through the rest of the schedule. You really are hard pressed to find a time that they like struggled outside of that weird A&M game against Johnny Manziel. Who among us?
Two things hurt that Bama team in terms of legacy. One is what you just mentioned right there. Johnny Manziel's the story of 2012. Okay. Here's the story. So Bama was on the wrong end of the biggest story in college football in Johnny Manziel. And Bama actually almost came back and won that game. People forget that.
Yep.
But that part kind of overshadows who Bama was. And then it's almost like 2022 Georgia, and that we view the team that Bama beat in the national championship, that Notre Dame team, as, oh man, how many other teams would have put up a better game than that group, including 2012 Georgia. And so we view it through that way, and then it takes away from who Bama was ultimately in 2012, and it's the Brent Musburger, Catherine Webb game that ends up being the story, the Barrett Jones, AJ McCarron fight. Like, there are so many other things to talk about besides how good Bama was, and the fact that Bama just like casually closed out its third title in 4 years. So I had 2012 Bama on my board. I don't know that I would have taken it. But I do like it as a pick, and I think it's perfectly fair to say it was better than 2011.
Man, I'm doing a lot of Alabama defending today. Here's the deal, and I didn't realize this until right now. The fact that they went to Tiger Stadium and won that electric game against LSU, who was trying to get revenge for obviously the disaster that happened that same year in January in 2012. So the fact that they go to Tiger Stadium November 3rd, and then they host Johnny Manziel and Texas A&M November 10th. I mean, if you guys want to talk about the SEC conspiracy to get Bama to a championship, that's not it. All right. The fact that you got to play your two hardest games of the schedule back to back. But then to your point, okay, they come back against Western Carolina, whatever. They smoke Auburn 49-0. And then they beat, I want us to all be real. This 2012 Georgia team would be right there with this 2011 LSU team as like the greatest team in, like, that would have been the greatest team in Georgia history. I'm just gonna be honest with you. All right, like, the Herschel team was in the 80s. I get it. I was so, go watch film of that team.
Yep,
and then go watch that 2012 Georgia team that came, I mean, so short of winning, that just a little bit short. I mean, so that's the key, is that if they lose that game against a great Georgia team, we're having different conversations about Mark Richt, about Alabama, about Nick Saban. So the fact that they had to, have the target on their back from the LSU stuff. They beat them. They went 2-1 against LSU in 3 meetings. They had to get that. And then A&M, hey man, we've taken A&M seriously like 3 times in the last 20 years. Okay, like, to overlook that game, and then to have you watch the documentary and it's like everything went their way. Like, it's just the Mike Evans catch, all that. Sometimes it happens. Again, it was a great game that they only won by 5 despite controlling the whole game because Bama comes back. And so, point being, the fact that they were able to recover, smoke Auburn in like a kind of a trap game, beat Georgia, kind of keep Georgia off of their doorstep for the foreseeable till the Kirby years, right? And then, to your point, no reason to defend Brian Kelly here. They smoked that team. I remember watching. That was the team. That game felt over by the time it started. But that's not a mark on anything. It's the fact that they got to win a college football playoff game before anybody else. They got to beat a Georgia team that was probably the second best in the country.
Yeah, that night, dollar beers, dollar bowling. Watched Notre Dame, Bama. Good time. Good time with the boys that night. All right, let's close things out here with our final picks. I have our first non-national champ pick. I'm going for it. It's a little pandering. I don't care. Give me 2004 Auburn.
Oh.
Give me 2004 Auburn. And unbelievable team that people remember so fondly, and it has this great what if of what would it have looked like in the national championship if they had gotten to play against USC instead of an Oklahoma team that got blown out. I get it, all that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still picking USC to win that football game, but people don't really care about that. They just want to say how they were screwed and what didn't go in their favor. So it actually kind of plays here.
It
But
works out, yeah.
to think that an Auburn team could go undefeated and not get in going through the SEC is still unbelievable to this day. Of course, people like to leave out the fact that USC and Oklahoma were preseason 1-2, wire to wire. They were 1-2 undefeated teams as well. But that team was still special, and it doesn't really take away from what they did. Everybody remembers Ronnie and Cadillac, Jason Campbell, for future first round quarterback, and obviously that defense with Chiswick was incredible. I mean, that still was a group that kind of put the SEC on the map at a time when it needed to get back. And so I loved that 2004 Auburn team at the time. I have since been fortunate enough to be able to write about that team and interview Cadillac and Ronnie and even Tuberville back in the day, and write about that story. Go look that one up 6 years ago on SDS. But the impact that group had sort of got the SEC this rallying cry, this respect. So yeah, I'm going 2004 Auburn, despite the fact that they didn't even get to play for a national championship.
I don't know how to counter that, man. Yeah, I mean, it's just, yeah. I think that is an era that is hard to analyze. I think that exactly what you just said. It's hard to tell, but I think that they definitely deserve some shine. That's the fourth thing I would say. I would love to see them because again, everything changes. That's why we love college football and hope it stays the same in whatever ways it can. Everything switches on one game. It's not even like winning a championship, winning a Super Bowl. It's like, oh yeah, no, they were like, undefeated. They did everything they could have done. So yeah, I love that pick.
All right, close this out, Will. Who's going to end this draft?
Okay, man. I
want you to take 2011 LSU so badly.
I would have to take 2011 Bama.
Do you?
Or that's the thing. Yeah, I know what you want me to do because I thought about it. Because metrically, they're kind of a better team, but I can't do that. All right. Okay. We are going to go with our second. Wow, this is so crazy. We are going to go with our second non-national champion, and you're not going to believe who it is. That's right. 2016 Alabama.
Whoa. Okay. All right. A certain Hunter Renfrow pick play, allegedly.
Yeah.
2016 Bama. You picked 3 Bama teams in your draft? What
they
year
have
is
8
this?
natties, right? How many do they have?
I mean, goodness gracious.
So less than half of them?
I'm stunned that you ended this way, but that 2016 Bama team, that defense, historically great. Like, lost in the shuffle of all of the great Saban teams. We are having a much different conversation about Bama, probably, and they're going way higher off the board than 10 if they defend one final play.
Yeah, I mean, again, what am I doing, man? Anyway, a questionably legal play that if I were I'm a Saints fan. I can't sit here and tell you like they deserved it. This is a team that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, they went 9-1 in ranked games. And again, that's what it took. It took the most miracle on ice type ending from Clemson, and gave us a villain worse than Nick Saban at Dabo. But point being, people got to remember the whole controversy with Kiffin stepping down, the Washington game. They handled Washington in one of their greatest, other than the Bourne, probably greatest team in the 20th century, and it was just casual. And so with all that stuff going on, right, they still almost beat Clemson. Thanks to the OJ Howard game, thanks to all that. So I think I remember, this is when I was working at SDS, and I remember the whole criticism of the SEC. Well, it's just Alabama and everyone else. And it's bro, when you really go back and look through how they were smacking dudes, I kind of see that. This was the Jared Allen years, where he was or Jonathan Allen. Sorry, Jared Allen is a different gentleman, Caucasian one from Idaho. Jonathan Allen is one of the best defensive players in Alabama history, and that is a long and storied list. The way that at every level of this defense, they were horrifying. This is a team that, their defensive coordinator, wasn't that a Pruitt team as well? Who was their DC?
Yeah, Pruitt would have been the DC because that was Kirby's first year at Georgia.
Yep.
So he had just left, and that was, Pruitt left Florida State. Am I getting the timeline wrong of that one. No, Pruitt went.
No, I nailed that. It was his first, his one season at Alabama, his first season at Alabama. But again, this is a team that went from Lane Kiffin to Steve Sarkisian, two of the greatest offensive minds of our lives. Now, granted, but that transition, and that was a Lane Kiffin that I don't know if he's been asked about this. I'm sure he has. Would handle that different today, just straight up. Was not a professional move. Was kind of just left his team hanging to go to FAU and all that. And I think that if he had that moment back, especially now that Nick is gone, he would have thought to himself, "That was a little bit disrespectful to a guy who kind of put me back on the map." But I don't think that, we should punish the kids for that. I think that, going from Lane to Sark just goes to show, even though Sark is a great mind and also has made a playoff in his own right, these are two offensive coordinators that have elevated their current steps to kind of the highest they've been ever for one, and in the modern era for the other. So, yeah, I think that, this is a team that still had, that still had some of this mystique of the Henry team without Henry, right? They were still able to smoke people on defense. They were able to beat people to sleep. And yeah, I just think they're an underrated team. This is a team that had the number one defense in America, number 16 offense, one of the greatest. This was the standard for modern quote unquote defenses until we saw 2021 Georgia. So yeah, I think this team would do embarrassingly well against modern teams if you could just say, "Hey, Lane Kiffin, keep your job," or give it to Steve Sarkisian 2 weeks earlier.
Consider that alarm my way of saying that we should probably wrap up here. But yeah, look, cool. I didn't think you were going to go there. I thought we were going to have to save that for honorable mention. 2018 Alabama is also another one for honorable mention. 2017 Alabama. 2017 probably more so than 2018. Yeah, 2017 Bama. We'll go there. 2003 LSU was one that you could have had, but didn't put them on there because 5 lost Florida at home, the split national champion.
Come on, bro.
I know. Didn't mean to go there. 2006 Florida. The reasons I already brought up earlier about not being as dominant, the South Carolina thing, and winning that on the last second play. And then even the 2 lost teams you mentioned, 2012 Georgia, 2007 LSU. I don't think 2000 LSU gets chalked up as one of the great SEC teams of all time because of the 2 losses. But that was
saying sometimes.
Yeah,
and they're saying forever.
This is true. All right, so here's how we wrapped up. My 5 was 2021 Georgia, 2019 Bama, 2009 Bama rather, and then 2010 Auburn, 2022 Georgia, and 2004 Auburn. And you, Mr. Bama Homer, had 2019 LSU, 2008 Florida, 2020 Bama, 2012 Bama, and 2016 Bama. My gosh, I didn't think you were going to take more than one Bama team. You took 3. How about
Look,
it?
I'm following our buddy Marlo's example, right? He's an LSU fan now. I'll be a Bama homer if it wins me one of these freaking polls. I swear. Once you got the second Georgia team, I was like, hold on, that's half of our fan base. Love it. No, I'm just kidding. But again, I do think that goes to show, right? Again, it's just like the TCU thing. If Saban had won fewer titles, we would value each one more. And so you got 3 Bama teams. Yeah, there were way more than that. I'm sitting here going, 17, 18, chop liver. Because the real dominant ones that we saw win were in a different tier. And then that's what happens when winning becomes, when it becomes expected. So I think that, those get cheapened. We start to overvalue other stuff. But I feel great about my picks 1 through 5. I think that squad's whooping butt, dude.
You might win. You might win this poll. I will we'll make sure that the poll is out there. We'll tweet it out probably by the time people are listening to this on Friday, and everybody can vote on who won this between you and me. All right, let's kick it to Pitch Me. All right, Will, Pitch Me. We're talking the smartest SEC fan base. I think that's going to be either really, really easy, and we're going to feel like we defaulted to the easiest answer because there's an obvious answer, Vandy, or we're going to have some good pitches in here, and we're going to rethink what it actually means to be a smart fan. And being a smart fan does not necessarily just mean you are at an institution that requires you to be smart. It means you are a fan base that thinks logically, that thinks intelligently, that is not delusional. Does that feel like a fair bar to set for smartest SEC fan base?
Yeah, it's like how Cardinals fans say they're the smartest fans in baseball.
I appreciate you saying that just to get me fired up.
They say it. I'm not agreeing with it.
If there's a take that maddens me more than that one, I haven't found it. Cardinal fans, just the best breed of human and baseball fan. They just get it in ways that nobody else
We could
does.
never hope to. Yeah.
We don't know how to cheer for the right things. Only Cardinal fans do. They don't gatekeep any of that stuff. When they're up 7-0 in a game and then a former player hits a solo home run, the Cardinal fans are the smartest one because they'll stand up and cheer for it.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a game-winning home run, would Cardinal fans cheer for their former player after hitting a home run to take the lead? No, they wouldn't. But because it's 7-0, they're the smartest fans of baseball. Anyways, let's talk smartest SEC fan bases. Not that I'm mad about any of that other stuff.
It's a table set. I like it. Yeah, like they got the handbook out. But that's a great example. Like some fan bases make their whole thing about being smart. Like some fan, oh, we're the oldest fan base. We're like, when you think about like, that's how I imagine like Lakers Celtics fans. They're like, well, my grandpa was a Lakers fan. Your team's only been around since '04. And it's like, okay, like yeah.
Is there? I have an example that comes to mind for when it comes to national fan base that's considered by many to be the smartest fan base. Some might say they're delusional, but is there one that comes to mind for you?
The smartest. See, it's tough because the bigger the fan base is, the more like bandwagon and like sidewalk fans are. And again, I've always said I'm a sidewalk fan of LSU. I grew up in Baton Rouge, didn't go to LSU, so like I can't obviously talk any mess there. But yeah, like something like Yankees fans, there are just too many of them. There are just too many of them to actually count because the weighted average just kind of mirrors the populace. I mean, in terms of like a sports fandom, I feel like
no, it's just college football. Just
college sorry. Yeah, just college football. I think that like some of the, I think there have been some fan bases that get it. Like honestly, I know we talk about them a lot. Iowa's a great example. I think they have been really playing along with it. They're not saying they're going to beat Ohio State every year. They're not saying okay, whatever, but they really respect what they're good at and they know what they're good at. They know their punters' names, stuff like that. Yeah, I think that. At times it's interesting because a lot of it's tied to passion. Like I've met lots of very, very level-headed Auburn fans. I also know what Auburn fans have done at a macro scale. So it's hard when you talk about a college university because as we've talked about before, basketball fans are different than football fans. Baseball fans are different. But yeah, I don't really know if there is outside of like a Northwestern or some type of school that's like, good at like Duke football is a good example. I'm sure they would have super smart fans.
But that's the thing. Like, are we just defaulting to the academic institution? Because if that's the case, then we'll just put up like an academic poll results and we'll just say what's the smartest university and then we'll just kind of be done with it. There's no real pitch in something like that.
No, you're right. I'm just saying it's almost like the amount of bandwagon fans you have is inversely related to it. That's why I said Duke football because Duke basketball is not like that. And so point being like it's a suffering fan base, right? It's like the way that almost like Browns fans are in the NFL. It's like nothing is keeping you here. Like the fans that are the most logical are the ones that are acknowledging kind of their suffering, or if they've been consistently pretty good, they at least acknowledge like why, or they don't freak out when things go bad, which is very few fan bases, to be clear.
I think Nebraska and Iowa fans are two that come to mind immediately.
Right.
Nebraska gets a lot of credit for that. And it was a different conversation. Like I remember hearing that conversation 2013 of like how smart the fan base was. You can't write dumb stuff and get away with it. You will always be tested on the ins and outs of the specific roster, like in a fan obsessed way, but also in like oh man, like they actually know, they know, the different key pivotal moments of what their team has gone through and how that's impacted them. And, how certain decisions have come across and they have more probably self-awareness than some might realize. Now, again, that was like 10 years ago. That's a little bit different than any sort of Nebraska fan that's telling you that they're about to win a national championship when they haven't been to a bowl game since 2016. In my personal experience, Nebraska fans, Iowa fans have had a lot of self-awareness that I think would definitely check these boxes. They have been suffering in their own unique ways. Nebraska fans more than Iowa fans recently, for sure, at the expense of Iowa. But yeah, the fan base who kind of understands what the program is trying to do, and how to react to certain things. Like I remember like having Iowa friends that weren't necessarily my two close buddies, Ben and Bronson, who like after they walloped Penn State in 2021, and that was like a top 5 matchup, I think at the time, they were like, yeah, this team's not good. Like this Iowa team is not going anywhere. Do not get it twisted. And maybe people have like a different perspective of like 2015 Iowa because that was very vocal with the disrespect that they were getting from the Colin Cowards of the world and stuff like that. But self-awareness, that's kind
Yep.
of what we're talking about. Maybe we should have phrased this differently as like most self-aware fan base, because really that's kind of more so what I'm looking for than just
Hmm.
do you have a bunch of brainiacs within your fan base.
I think as you're saying this, and you're right, there's a couple of names that have also stuck out to me. Oklahoma State fans have impressed me.
Oh,
They're ones they've kind of been all over the place. Like they've actually had some legitimately contending teams. Like had two or three in the last, let's say, 15 years. Obviously, the 2011 team. There was that one that like narrowly missed the playoff in 2021, I believe. Yeah, and they
the Baylor game, yeah, Big 12
Yep,
championship.
exactly. Yep, they were in to stand up, but yeah, they I've seen them in like kind of Big 12 Twitter be kind of like cool, and they are kind of like they've had the most success, honestly, of the Big 12 teams when you really think about the amount of 10-win seasons. But they are kind of, I hate to say little brother because it's so diminutive, but like their record against Oklahoma is not great. You know what I'm saying? They've had some big wins for sure. Don't get me wrong, but they know that, and I think that the way the kind of other left out Pac-12 schools has been pretty like Oregon State fans, Cal fans, Stanford fans. That one's not related to education as much. They might be crazy. I don't know. But the way that their fan bases have reacted to that news on Twitter, just being like, hey, like, as an Oregon State fan, like, we pretty much kind of knew what was happening. We know that we don't have Nike money. We know what's up. This still sucks and we're sad about it. But, like, what are we going to do? And, like, watching them actually have real, like, they're not sitting there saying, we should be in the Big Ten. They're not sitting there saying we have the same value as a USC, but they're like, can we just play some football and not lose our Apple Cup, please?
Yeah, and now that you're mentioning some of those schools, I'm wondering, does a smart fan base yield more stability at the head coaching spot? Is that part of it? Is when you don't have a fan revolt, an unnecessary fan revolt, does it lead to more stability? I mean, sometimes you could say that's a good thing. Sometimes it's maybe not a good thing. And sometimes you
Yeah.
do need fans who are reactive in ways that athletic directors are not. And so maybe sometimes it kind of pays to be a little bit more volatile. Like people always want to like clown on Tennessee fans for being as crazy as they are and for, the Schiano, that whole thing and the way that played out. But at the same time, yeah,
They were right.
It led to Jeremy Pruitt. So it's hard to say that this was.
But it got here. You know what I'm saying?
But
Schiano
it eventually got here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, you're right. You're right. They were not right necessarily. I think Jeremy Pruitt just kind of was like a panic hire, but I think they got to the place they needed to get. And as you say that, man, it just feels like Iowa's running away with this because they have a longtime head coach who has limitations, and they don't really try to fire him every year. That's like the only coach that's been there. Because even like, I mean, I guess Saban doesn't really count or didn't really count because why would you ever fire Nick Saban? But outside of that, like guys are trying to fire Dabo. That's nuts to me,
Yeah. I mean, I could understand the arguments, and there are certainly different pockets of fandom. So it's going to sound like we're generalizing today. That's not the intent, but it just kind of comes with the territory. So we'll try and not do too much of that. Let's start with the Saturday
one more note. Wisconsin fans pretty cool from what I've seen.
Yeah. I've dealt with a decent amount of Wisconsin fans. One of my family friends growing up was actually Bucky the Badger for a bit.
No way.
Yeah. He's got some stories. Shout out Henry Slingerland. Great pride of Lake Forest High School. The Wisconsin fan base is a unique one, a self-aware one, like that understands. And Big Cat is probably as vocal of a Wisconsin fan as there is, and understands that his team isn't winning a national championship. Like the goal is get to the Rose Bowl, do this, and this, and having that perspective is kind of what we're talking about. And maybe some fan bases, they get knocked for not being as smart because it's harder for them to have that perspective, or because they've seen those highs, it's harder for them to have that self-awareness, that intelligence. So look, your own personal experiences are definitely going to impact this conversation, but that's the point of Pitch Me. And so we will truly, I think today, be able to listen to pitches to sell us on the smartest SEC fan base.
Because I'll tell you who has no entries in our comments, Cotter. LSU.
LSU did not make the cut today. We don't need to disclose any biases.
No reason to disclose. I'm not making that case for my people today.
None. Yeah. Look, I mean, there is something to be said for someone that can sing Call in Baton Rouge and Neck and just not miss a beat. That takes some intelligence. There's to be able to remember that, you got to be musically gifted. There's a lot of lyrics that go into it. Just saying, just throwing it out there. All right, let's start with this one from Sports Mafia LLC. That's not intimidating at all. Who says University of Florida was voted number one best public university in the USA. This is a fact. But the reason this made the cut is Will put this in here. This Sports Mafia LLC, who I'm a little bit worried about saying anything negatively about, they doubled down and tripled down. They continued with, let's see, Berkeley is a horrible school. The teachers and students are all extremely ignorant people, and they have been raising tuition every year for over 20 years. I got a master's degree from Florida for 20,000 total with no scholarship. You can't even do that in half a semester for that much at Berkeley. Also, yeah, another shot at Berkeley, wherein Sports Mafia LLC said, if you think Berkeley is a great school, you were either brainwashed or just painfully never have been there. I took an LSAT prep class at UC Berkeley, and it was a terrible experience. Worst students and teachers I have ever met at any college. I've experienced 40 to 50 different colleges, either attending, visiting friends, or going to sports events.
This is the reason why I like this one so much is this just shows the exact disconnect. Like, let me tell you something. I didn't get into the University of Florida. I applied. It was one of the schools I applied to. I applied to a ton of schools. They were one that said no thanks. I didn't have great grades. I was locked into my future career path, and therefore I'm here. But Florida is a great school, okay? But this right here is why I don't think they can make it for the smartest fans. Because I see someone who went to Florida and I know they did something academically that I could not do, but yet this dude is just fighting with randos about LSAT prep courses at Berkeley. It's the classic. You try to sound smart and you end up sounding like Dwight Schrute.
Florida will double down and then just go to whatever lengths possible. And I think that's reflected in the Florida Twitter that I have dealt with. Sometimes great, sometimes you know what, just hit the old mute button and go to a different conversation. That they have a lot of that. And Florida has a little bit of the Michigan vibe where, there is a certain standard that is always going to be at the forefront of the conversation about coaches, about who's good enough, about whether or not the quarterback play is up to their specific standard. And while I do think that people that graduate from Florida have a higher IQ than me, based on my personal experience, I will say they're probably not making the cut as smartest fan base. Maybe not always the most self-aware fan base. Now, I will say, I think they're pretty self-aware of how difficult the schedule is.
Yeah.
I do. I have seen a lot of smart Florida takes about that from Florida fans, and recently kind of, writing about some of that stuff as well. And we talked about it with Chaos and Errors. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt there. But that's going to be an awfully difficult pitch for me to hear based on the way that Florida fans, I think, come across sometimes without even knowing that they come across that way.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Well, I think Florida has the highest discrepancy between people that attended there. Like, I could name, 10 people that went to UF that I think are super smart. Talal, that used to work at SDS, is awesome, super smart stats guy. Kevin from SDS, super
Neil
smart,
Blackman
Florida grad.
too.
But the thing is, I talk to and love those people, and they're my friends. Those are not the people that talk to me the loudest online. And so for the LSU fans, we're all kind of crazy. We know that about ourselves. I could have a conversation with two Florida fans, one that went there and one that did not, and be like, dude, there was a Florida fan, or sorry, not a Florida fan, a Florida student at the FSU game, and I was talking to him the whole time. I was like, you know what? Let's just talk about Joe's schedule this year, Hoss. And he was not dumping on us. He was not doing anything mean. We were having a great time. I was like, man, if more Florida fans could be like this guy, and I realized he's like a doctor that was going to school in Florida. I was like, that'll do it. Well, FSU fans were just screaming and trying to throw stuff at me. I was like, you guys were winning. Relax.
Yeah, FSU fans were a very on edge bunch of last year. It felt like, and it turns out understandably so. Florida fans, though, they are a very specific group in the SEC. That look, they're going to rub some people the wrong way. That's just the way that things are. And when you have as many coaching changes as they've had, they're probably not always going to be painted in the best light.
Yep.
All right, let's go to this one. I don't understand this one. I'm just going to preface this by saying that MSH Austin. Sure.
Okay.
I'd like to think Hog fans, but the insistence by the fan base in wearing camo, even the swim meets, gets it an auto DQ. And for the record, that means disqualification, not Dairy Queen. Well, it can also mean Dairy Queen.
Don't limit yourself there. Come on.
Yeah, seriously. I don't get this one for the life of me, and maybe I'm just missing out on this one. They wear camo all the time.
I don't know. Yeah, this is one of those where like hit us up. Like if you could send me 5 pictures of a ton of Arkansas fans wearing camo at swim meets, then go for it. It's just we both were like, that's not our experience. But like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe they just love camo, but good for them.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to this one other than okay, that'd be a unique quirk. I don't really know that that adds or takes away from the fan experience and how smart they are, but I think Hawk fans are at least a bit more realistic. It helps when you've been humbled too.
Right.
When you've been humbled like they were in the 2010s with the Bielema thing looking like it was going to work out and then not working out, the Chad Morris thing never even having a chance to be able to work out and now getting back into this place. I think Arkansas fans do have really good perspective of being the smartest ones in the SEC. Though there's nothing that I could say definitively that makes them stand out, and I could be wrong on that. But maybe having, you talked about it before of like trying to be the everything school. Florida does that as well. Tennessee does that, obviously. Of like, hey, we're not so like too invested into this one thing, and it allows us to have better perspective on these other things. Maybe that's a part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, and like one thing I'll say about Arkansas fans, which is like kind of one of our descriptors here, is they've been really good sports whenever I've dealt with them, right? And Arkansas has been the team that's ruined LSU seasons. Like that's kind of their kryptonite team where they play Alabama after the bye week, they come and beat up after the Bama game, which is usually a loss. Arkansas then shocks them. Like I've seen that 100 times, or not 100, but I mean they beat LSU in 07, right? Like and they were not jerks about it. It was just like. And they also have an edible mascot, so you got to kind of take everything with a grain of salt. Where it's like, hey, you can eat our mascot for fun, and so I just feel like they're very funny when they beat you. Like they're like, I'm like, okay, dang, you got me there.
Yeah, the hog is just an underrated mascot, but
Tusk.
yeah, I mean, look, we can
King.
save that. We can save that discussion for another time.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to this one. You knew it was coming. Old school fanatic. Oh, by the way, fanatics, like actual fanatics, the company gave us a little shout out here, said that we should give everyone a quiz. I'm not against that idea. I'm not against that idea. We might have to circle back to that. Old school fanatic says Vandy without a doubt. I've said forever Vandy should move to the Ivy League. They would be champions every year. And then piggybacking off of that, so we'll just combine these two. Giabella Mom 01 says after Vanderbilt, probably Texas A&M voted best public college in Texas over University of Texas and is highly competitive. Okay, so the Vandy thing. It's the people itself who are being judged in this topic of smart, right? Like nobody is denying if we're talking about universities in the SEC, Vandy has different standards than the rest of the conference. Okay, that has been shown not just with admissions and stuff like that, but how they actually spend their money, and that's the biggest indicator of how a school prioritizes things, big picture things. Vandy's going to win that argument every single time. But there's two ways you can go with this. Vandy has either figured this out that maybe the rest of us invest too much of our time and energy into football. And that makes them smart because they're like, we're going to go off and do these great things. Like we're gonna figure out things that actually matter, that benefit society and our time and our bank accounts and stuff like that. And maybe they've figured that part out, and so their fans deserve to be considered smart for that reason. Or alternatively, maybe they're the dumb ones that just don't quite get it yet. Maybe they're the ones that haven't looked at this massive opportunity that is getting an SEC revenue check on an annual basis and understanding how much that could benefit so many of these areas that would provide you more entertainment. It's probably somewhere in the middle, but I don't know that we can sit here and say a fan base like Vandy's, just because of what they do from an academic standpoint, automatically makes them the smartest. Because I know when I come out with that crystal ball every single year, and it likely has Vandy with 1 or 0 SEC wins, I do actually hear about it from Vandy fans, and they'll get in my mentions and say blah, 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 blah. And then at season's end, I look up and I'm like, so who was right about that? Yeah, so
who's smart now, guys?
Who's the smart one here?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I don't think we can default to just what Vandy is all about and make that the cop out answer. What do you think?
It's almost like an N/A, right? Because you could look at someone whose life has led up to a path where they have attended like maybe the best university in the South and one of the best in America in Nashville, Tennessee, and go, this is a legitimately smart person. Like this person has it kind of figured out. Like you spent those extra, whatever, 20 hours cumulative or 100 hours, whatever. I'm not smart. I don't know if being smart works, but you spent those extra hours to like really study and really like take the time and pay attention in class. And so your life is now set up to where, you might get out, get better opportunities. You get to have a great time in college, da, da, da. But yeah, then like as fans, I now give them credit for the, like I always joke about like if the ball is round, we are sound. Like they're great at baseball, bowling, we're good. Basketball, shout out Festus Ezeli, right? Like, but I think it's like I said, it's kind of an N/A because like my cousin went to Vandy and cheered at Vandy, and she's like an Alabama fan. You know what I'm saying? Like it's that feels almost like at this point, especially if you are like an all day Vandy fan, like, are you okay, bro? Like, you may not actually be smart if that's how you're spending your time.
That's what I'm saying. So look, a lot of different ways you can go with that. Joshua Morris had another good point on top of that I want to include here. He said in Saturday Down South podcast Facebook group, he said Vanderbilt is the only right answer. What other team would storm the field calmly? Shout out Florida.
It's a point. They have like a meeting schedule. They're like, all right, guys, look, so we're going to storm it right now. Okay. Then we're going to have a minutes come out. We're going to have a note taker. We got to figure it out. All right.
But then the counterpoint is you're going to get fined anyways.
Get your money's worth.
Get your money's worth. Vandy did it wrong. You shouldn't have stormed calmly. You should have been willing to be able to get after it. So look, I think that actually hurts Vandy. That's a good point, but I think it hurts Vandy. Josh Steele says UGA, the coach is literally Kirby Smart.
All right, man.
Can't argue with that.
It disqualifies you. Actually, you're done.
Okay, let's do. Okay, I have a couple more that I want to get to. Tanner Stars, he says it's Kentucky. They fully understand their position in the SEC landscape and are not coming for their coach after a down season. Their expectations are firmly planted in reality, and that is not applicable to any other SEC fan base. I kind of agree with this. I kind of agree. And look, I have a different perspective of Kentucky fans. I admitted that, talking about, when we're talking about biases and stuff like that, my brother lives there. My sister-in-law works at Kentucky, and I have a different understanding of who they are. Like my sister-in-law's mom is like diehard Kentucky basketball fan. And it's an entirely different mindset with Kentucky football. And that's how a lot of Kentucky fans that I have dealt with are. And it's almost like because they've been humbled so much on the football side and because they put all of their eggs into the basketball basket, it allows them to actually look at things with a more objective perspective when it comes to football. So I don't hate that pitch at all. Like I think that there's really a lot of truth in that. And if we're talking about self-awareness, I do think that Kentucky checks a lot of those boxes.
So I should have used this instead of Duke for an example because there are just so many more Kentucky football fans. I fully agree with this. I think if we're talking about football fans, I think Kentucky has the most rational, smartest football fans of anyone. The problem is, of course, Kentucky basketball fans, of which, Drake is one. You start to get into the bandwagon aspect because they are sickos for basketball. And I mean that in the most endearing way. Like the way that I'm a sicko for like recruiting or LSU football, they're that way for basketball. So football feels like a little bit of like dressing or like sprinkles on top. But I mean, I think that's the other thing is that like, Stoops and Cal, and I talked about them being linked at the time. Like, I think that the heat on Cal was very deserved. I think that team stuck with Cal longer than they probably could have and should. And they didn't riot. They didn't set anything on fire. They didn't boycott. So honestly, it's like, yeah, I mean, even at like a Tennessee, I don't think Cal lasts more than 2 or 3 years after like 2018 or is when it really got bad.
But let's leave it to football. We're not talking about like all like every other sport because then you get really into the weeds with certain things. Yeah. And if we're just sticking with football, that's kind of the ideal scenario, is it not?
Yeah.
And we talk about yielding a coach with stability. Kentucky has that with Stoops, and I think that there is some frustration now. There's frustration after the way the Texas A&M thing played out. There's no doubt about that. We'll see what that looks like
Mm-hmm.
now, and now that it's known that there is actually a job that maybe he would consider leaving for that isn't Iowa or something like that. But it is definitely a fan base that has an entirely different reputation in one big revenue sport compared to another. Let's end with these two, and I'm very tempted to have these be our winners because I think they're excellent.
Okay.
Corey Puckett, not to be confused with Kirby Puckett, but Corey Puckett says, if there is anything I've learned from social media, it's that college football fan bases are all incredibly stupid. Trick question, but I suppose it's probably Vandy if I had to guess. Okay, yeah, something to be said for
Mm-hmm.
that. Chris Tapley says, none of us. That's why it's so much fun. If we aren't beating each other with mustard bottles and corn dogs with neck playing in the background, what is the point? He's not wrong.
That's the other end of the Vandy spectrum is LSU fans, right? It's like, well, you are having the best time.
And maybe that's what smart fan bases do is they understand, look, you're not going to win a national title every year. You have to enjoy the crap out of every single season
Yep.
because if you don't, then you're going to look back 20, 30 years from now and say, what have I been doing with this this fandom, this passion that I have in life in which I don't feel like it's ever been satisfying enough. So if you're not enjoying it and if you're not doing all those things, then maybe you're the dumb fan base and maybe you should be out there playing neck and throwing mustard bottles and calling the hogs even when you're 2-10. Like this is the stuff that makes fandom great. So maybe that the answer is that no one has the smartest fan base and that we should actually, instead of rewarding smart fan bases for having great self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
we should just say, you know what, screw it. Let's all be dumb. Let's all be irrational. We can be smart about other things in life. We
Yeah.
can be, but let's all be dumb about this. Let's just appreciate that.
So I'll say this, like T-Bob, our boy, said it best. Historically, LSU is like Greece, right? when they're
It's pretty good.
when they're high, they're on top of the world, all right. But when it's not so hot, it's not so hot. LSU, I have often said over the course of my life, it has been more fun to be an LSU fan than a Bama fan, and I stick by that so often because there are so many losses in my life that I've just gone, all right. And people are going to call that loser mentality. I don't care. LSU has more natties than everybody in Alabama. Right? I don't care. That's the best part of it. And so, like, Georgia fans, you guys don't take winning seriously. All right, have fun beating Kentucky, bro. We have wins against Bama. And so, point being, like, I think that
Dang, LSU fired.
Well, it's like I've had people. Here's the criticism of like from Ohio State fans and like Georgia fans, like these fan bases that consistently win 10 games. It's like, well, you guys just don't have that standard that we do. Yeah, we have championships.
Georgia's got 2 in the last 3 years. I mean, just say. Like,
and LSU has been in 4 in my life and won 3. That's still bigger. So
yeah, I mean, I just wouldn't. That wouldn't be the team that I would say like enjoy. Beating Team X.
No, I know, but I'm saying that in terms of like everything is about the standard now. It's about not having fun, right? Because that's the Nick Saban method. That like, and Kirby has a little bit more fun, I think, than Saban did. Like we talked about them, like running the fun formations and run up the score, stuff like that. But I think that we've been kind of brainwashed by like the Saban way of life to just think that winning should be like business and you should expect it. And that's all I'm saying is that LSU has been lucky enough to have like a big win about every year, have beaten like a top 10 team or at least a rival team or ruined a rival season or done something like that. And so I think LSU is so unique in that way that like it's impossible to have a hollow 10-win season in the SEC West pretty much is all I'm saying. So
True.
I think that like that doesn't necessarily make LSU better off. I think they've just been in a very unique position, because like Tennessee fans do not have as much fun as LSU fans do because they have had much more embarrassing losses. So being over-invested is only good if your team is good, is all I'm saying. Because unlike the quote-unquote like fan passion investment tier, like Tennessee is right up there with LSU. But putting that much effort into Tennessee has been roundly a worse gamble than with LSU. You know what I'm saying? So that's my only point is that being dumb fan guy is good when your team is good, but it also leads you to just want to fire guys or want to be like, we had LSU fans, I guess they wanted to bench Nussmeier or wanted to bench Jaden Daniels this season or last season. And it's like, guys, you don't see the big plan. So like, that's the thing is that being passionate is good if your team backs it up is all I'm saying.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It makes the world go round.
Yeah.
It does. If everybody was smart and always had the best opinions and there was never any discourse about any of this stuff,
Yeah.
I would be talking on a college football podcast in early June. Okay.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be. I like that's just the truth. So I mean, I'm tempted to say I like Chris's answer a lot. I
Yeah.
really do. I also think that Tanner's got a point. I think Tanner's got a point about Kentucky fans and their perspective. So I'll defer to you here. That those would be my final two. Would you like to
Yeah.
break that tie or go outside of those?
Let me add one caveat because I kind of danced around this, but I didn't say it. When you start talking about the standard, you stop having fun. And I think that's not smart. I think that if I was a, and again, it sounded like I was like dumping on Georgia. If I was a Georgia fan, I would be lit as heck watching us blow out everybody. I literally would love that so much. It's just when it starts to be an expectation and it starts to be a comparison and every loss starts to mean way more and every win. And it's just like, I think that chilling out is the key, right? It just enjoying the wins, not taking so much out of the losses. And yeah, I think oh man, I mean, in that way, you almost got to think of an Ole Miss, right? but that would be the funniest.
Now we're getting back to who is the best tailgating, and that's
but like that's the they are smart because they really enjoy the wins and they don't really care about the losses. So like anyway, so point being, their fan experience is great. So yeah, I think that in terms of overall, and like we had A&M shouted out, I get that. Texas is an answer that I think that's another place that like you could go and have a lot of fun. I think that for the sake of this, oh, and also shout out Adam Spencer who said that Mizzou fans are the smartest fans as he is a Mizzou grad. But
very
I think
unbiased opinion coming from
yes,
Adam. Yep, appreciate that.
But I think that like you would have to go with like a Kentucky or even like a Mizzou that's like, hey, we are rational about our expectations every year. We do not expect a championship or bust. We have fun when it matters, but we also don't get too down on it. So yeah, I kind of love Kentucky as an answer. I think that you're totally right, which is that, there when you start to be obsessed with being the smartest and the best fan, you start getting away from what being a fan is. And that's why we talk about like the personal seat licenses and the prices of games going up and like not being able to bring your family to games and stuff like that because people are gatekeeping fandom. So number one, I think you're totally right. I think we shouldn't gatekeep fandom, and however people want to have fun, they should have fun. But number two, I think that the fan base that has a lot of fun and still isn't super duper crazy has probably been Kentucky football.
Yeah, I'm okay with that answer. I
Yeah.
am. And, I remember being there for the 2021 LSU game, and Kentucky's off to that great start. And LSU is obviously it's in the midst of a loss season. Coach O ends up getting fired, of course. That game was
after that game, I believe,
straw.
right?
Well, that was when they made the decision, but it came a couple weeks later. And the mindset of Kentucky fans, because Georgia was up next. And the Georgia game after that, I remember like they're like, yeah, we're gonna enjoy this. Like we think we have a really good chance to beat LSU. And then the Georgia game, Georgia's Georgia, but we're gonna enjoy this. Like we're off to our best start, and like since the Bear Bryant era, they're gonna take advantage of this opportunity, of this time, and just like soak it all in. Because why wouldn't you? And it's not what's on the horizon, what's next. You got an SEC West power that's a traditional power that's coming into town, and enjoy it. So I've always kind of remembered that as well. That definitely helps with a pitch, but yeah, I think Kentucky's our answer. Smartest SEC football fan base, not smartest with every sport. We're not saying that definitively, but smartest SEC football fan base, Kentucky.
Oh, I do want to give a interesting note here. Talking to an old like Bear Bryant era Bama fan is really nice. As well as that may sound, that's actually a lot of my family, is from Alabama. And when you talk about like these old stories about like how the games used to be, how they remember players, and how they can kind of compare and contrast that to what's going on today, that's super cool. I think that anyone who has like that kind of a universe scope and can see things in terms of, well, yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry might have won the Heisman, but my favorite running back was this guy from the 80s or whatever, or Bobby Humphrey or something. So yeah, I think those fans that have been around forever also and like have stuck with it and have grown up with it, I think is very cool.
Feinbaum gets into a good deal of those conversations too. And I know sometimes people will tune out callers and stuff like that, but some of the times that he can go down a rabbit hole and talk with some of these people and some of the memories that he can bring up as somebody that did not grow up in that era with that perspective, it is actually really entertaining once you kind of get down that sometimes and you learn something. And yeah, that's definitely a different type of intelligence to be able to have that perspective from, an era that was half a century ago to be able to talk
Mm-hmm.
about. Very different probably than the current modern Alabama football fan. All right, that'll do it for Pitch Me. It had been a minute since Pitch Me, so it was good to be able to get back to that. Good to be able to have you back on. If you have not, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Saturday Down South on YouTube, where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the STS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ Rivera, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.